to my podcast, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Khan, and I am the Government Mechanic. My goal is to teach you how to look under the hood of government to figure out exactly what's broken so you can decide what actions will fix what problems. And we have to do this. Our government is broken, which means that our departments and agencies are broken. So in this podcast, we're looking at the executive branch of government, the departments and agencies that report to the White House. It's not the congressional branch, it's not the courts or the judicial branch, it's the departments and agencies, and they are broken. I want to begin by talking about how I've organized this podcast. Then I'm going to say a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to introduce my very special guest, Kathy Monahan. I've organized this podcast in a very specific way. Episode 1 that we're in is the welcome. I'll talk about myself and why I'm doing this, and then Kathy will join me. Episode 2 is the playbook. We're going to talk about 7 layers of government agencies. So if you do look under the hood of government and decide that you are going to do something to fix a broken department or agency, here are 7 layers that will help you understand what to look at and how the layers interact. Episodes 3 through 18 are specific topics, such as veteran suicide, homelessness, the crisis in our food supply, and climate change. And in every case, we're going to talk about the mechanics of government, how to look at the parts and layers of departments and agencies and figure out how to move forward to solve specific problems. So right now we're in episode 1. Welcome to my podcast. I want to say a little bit about myself and why I'm doing this. I am Dr. Lynn Sandra Khan. My PhD is in clinical psychology. My area of expertise is group dynamics. But instead of being a group therapist or a family therapist, I just decided to take what I know about group dynamics and the psychology of organizations into the federal government to fix broken agencies. I stayed for 32 years. The last 22 years, I worked at the Federal Aviation Administration, a wonderful organization with incredibly focused and dedicated air traffic controllers all over our country and in fact around the world. Brilliant system engineers. It was a great organization. A little bit after I got there in January 1993, the White House asked the FAA if I could be detailed to a new office that was intending to reinvent government. And I ended up staying there for 6.5 years off and on, most of that time representing aviation. The goal of reinventing government was to create a government that worked better, cost less, and delivered better results. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast. I learned so much on the Reinventing Government staff. I learned to look at government as a system with different parts that interact and relate to each other. I learned some really specific things like the power of a very clearly worded executive order. The first executive order for reinventing government was customer service standards. And so that launched the executive order launched all these conversations inside federal departments and agencies at all levels. Who are their customers? Agency leaders never really thought about the American people as the customer of government services. So that was the beginning of reinventing government. And I learned so much in so many ways. When reinventing government ended in election day 2000, when Al Gore lost that election, everybody left. If people were political appointees, they actually didn't have a job anymore. And I, as a federal employee, the Federal Aviation Administration had to take me back. So I went back to the FAA. After, in early 2001, even like January 2001, I started working on a strategic plan that was going to transition all of aviation from ground-based radar to satellite-based communication, navigation, and surveillance. And that involved input from 7 different agencies. And that's where I really learned about how important a very clear, focused strategic plan is, one that identifies priorities and what's really important. And when I retired from the government in 2013, I took that knowledge and started working with justice agents, law enforcement agencies doing justice reform, including work in juvenile detention centers, jails, and probation. Somehow, in early 2015, out of, I think, well, certainly a great deal of confidence and probably not a lot of arrogance, I decided I was going to run as an independent candidate for president of the United States. And bless her heart, Kathy Monahan, a few months later, a bunch of months later, agreed to be my vice presidential running mate. So I want to introduce my guest on episode 1 of this podcast, Kathleen Elizabeth Mary Bridget Monahan Murphy. Kathy, hi, Kathy. Kathy and I were actually a really good pair because we both spent time on the Reinventing Government staff. We were both doing strategic planning, and we really enjoyed each other's company. We had a lot in common. We looked at government in the same ways, and it was a really, really good match. So, Kathy, welcome to episode 1. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe you could tell folks if I left out anything about you you want to add, and how we met.
Well, originally, of course, we met during the NPR with the National Performance Review or National Partnership for Reinventing Government, depending on what you decide to call it on any given day. It shifted somewhere along the way.
Yes, it did.
But that's where we met. But then when I read that you were going to be running for president and you were going to be doing the debate with the other independent candidates in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is not all that far from where I live in Pensacola, drove on over, and the rest is history from that standpoint.
It was great. So let's pause for a second, because I'm sure most people listening to this podcast don't even know that there are independent candidates for president, let alone that there were live debates, in-person debates. There were also some on radio and a few other ways of having an online conference. But there were 3, I think, really important face-to-face debates. So the first one was in Lake Charles. What stands out for you about that debate and what we started doing afterwards?
I think the camaraderie among the candidates. There wasn't the sniping and the looking for what did you do that maybe could be perceived as bad by the voters, so maybe I should bring that up. There was none of that. It was like, yeah, that concerns me too. How do you think we should deal with that? And we had these conversations over dinner, over breakfast, all the way along when we'd see each other at the different debates. Be like, hey, how you doing? How good to see you. How's yours going? Oh, it's going well. We were just great. We loved each other in terms of doing the work, and we pulled ideas from each other as well. It was just wonderful.
I think it was more in the second debate. So I think the second one was in Nevada and the third one was in Flint, Michigan. The one in Nevada was the first time I had actually heard journalists saying what you were, and reporters who were there saying what you're just saying, which was they were surprised that we were not in agreement with each other, that there was no vicious sniping and attacking, and that we're really open to hearing what people's ideas were. So then you decided to join me on the road. And I had already driven by January of 2016, I had already driven about 15,000 miles around the country. I think you and I did maybe 20,000 miles, give or take. We were flying.
Probably.
Yeah. And then I did another 45,000 miles by myself in between times that you and I are going around together. So from all that time campaigning, what stands out for you?
A couple of things. I love talking to people, but then again, as you can tell by my name, I love talking. So There is that. But listening to people and how their priorities and concerns shifted with the geographic area you were in. I mean, farmers have, the family farmer has real concerns that the mega farming organizations are going to run them out of business, and farms have been running for generations and generations, and they want to give them to their family and they don't want to lose them. And how can we help them keep that? People are concerned about education for their kids. It's everything. The one line that sticks out to me more than any other was I was talking to this one woman and she said, "You mean we have a choice?" Yes, you have a choice. But they didn't know. They just assumed one had to pick one or the other, that all the rest of this was just noise, and that's not true. So
I think media definitely ignored the independent candidates.
Yes,
not only the candidates, but our expertise, our points of view, kind of what you're saying, that we had been around the country really listening to people who were raising issues such as farming, such as veteran suicide, such as the problems with foster care. We were raising issues that the mainstream candidates didn't talk about because they really weren't, I don't think, deeply listening to what people around the country were saying. What else stands out for you in our time together?
So much. Just the different areas, and what each area had all these wonderful parts to them that you just feel like at our level, we were able to actually just walk in a place and say, "Hi, we're running for office, and talk with them." To do things on our level that people at the dual party area were not doing. They weren't listening. They only wanted to they weren't listening to small people. The small people never saw them other than on TV. And Absolutely. They saw us, all of us, all the independent candidates. They would see us physically. We would walk into their store,
Yep.
And it makes a difference. I still think it makes a difference. I think we made a huge difference.
I do too. What stands out for me, certainly the depth of feelings in the people that we talked with. Yeah. And that was when we were traveling together or independently. People were, we all love America. We love the United States of America. We are Americans, all of us. But the pain associated with the failure of our government agencies, you could feel it, see it, hear it. There were so many people in so much pain. So listening and hearing that stood out for me. People had solutions. We would often ask them, and what do you think ought to be the policy? And people definitely had ideas about how to fix things. Some of what stood out for me was visual. Driving, I remember driving, it was either Oklahoma or the Texas Panhandle somewhere, and I went through a town, and every store in the middle of Main Street was shuttered. They were all out of business. And then you'd have the bigger buildings above the storefronts that were maybe apartments or other residences. And they were all empty too. Windows. I remember one street where the windows were all broken in all the apartment buildings because nobody lived there. The whole part of that main street had been abandoned. So that stood out. We had some great food going.
Yes, we did.
I learned, I think there's an Irish pub in just about every town in America. You taught me that.
That's true. And if you want an opinion, go into an Irish pub. We always have opinions.
Yep. It was it was a life-changing experience for me. And part of why I'm doing this podcast is not only did we learn about what's going on in America at the grassroots all over the country and are able to compare what's happening in rural and urban areas, in mountains, deserts, plains, coastlines. We heard what people's ideas were for solutions, which was really important to me. And that's why I'm doing this. We understand a lot about government. This is why I wanted you as my very first guest. And we know how to go in and look at government. We know what needs to be fixed. There are issues that people agree on. We're not doing this in a partisan way. We are independents. So it's not, is it one party or the other party, right or left, conservative, liberal? It's not that. You know, everybody wants to reduce veteran suicide. Everybody wants family farms to survive. So it's how do we look at the mechanics of government to fix what's broken? And I think that was why I was delighted that you agreed to be my running mate and why I'm doing this podcast. And we did, by the way, do pretty well. So about 1,000 people filed paperwork with the Federal Election Commission to run for president. And 24, I think, got more than 1,000 votes. So on that list of 24, we were number 15. So we did okay. And I think we still are in contact with some of the other presidential debate candidates. And it was an amazing experience. So summing up, welcome to my podcast. I hope with my guest, Kathy Monahan, that you understand that there are people who know how to look under the hood of government, figure out what's broken, and make recommendations for actions that will solve problems inside agencies and help those agencies deliver better services to the American people. And I hope you'll come back for episode 2, which is the playbook, where we're going to talk about 7 layers of government and how to really diagnose what's going on inside government agencies. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're back for our next episode. Thank you so much, Kathy.
More than welcome.
Hope to hear from you soon. Bye.